is the Lightning Junkies podcast with your host, Chaz Cryptoson. On this week's episode, we have Will O'Byrne, best known for the Joule Lightning Wallet. Joule is a great browser extension that allows you to utilize your own Lightning node. As I mentioned in the episode, I probably use Joule more than almost any other wallet that I have. I very rarely use my mobile wallets and only use them when I'm out and about or I'm at a place that actually accepts Bitcoin or Bitcoin over Lightning. It seems like most of the good use cases for Lightning are still on the web and aren't really on mobile quite yet, or at least aren't in a place where they're actually easier to use than the web. Just wanted to give a quick shout out to Fold here. They're not sponsoring the podcast or anything like that. I just wanted to give them a quick shout out and to let you know that if you want to quickly purchase Amazon gift cards or Uber gift cards, etc., and be able to save money on top of it, you can definitely do that with Fold. They're also on mobile and such. Once again, this is not a sponsorship, and Fold has not contacted me in any way about talking about them on the podcast. Did you know it costs $100 a month for me to run this podcast? If you would like to chip in any Bitcoin or Bitcoin over Lightning to help me pay for these podcast costs, you can do so by going to crowdfund.lightningjunkies.net and chip in as much as you think the show deserves. You can chip in 1 sat or you can chip in 1 million. It's up to you. My goal is to provide content that is worthy of that 1 million sat chip in. So hopefully we'll get there this episode. Let's go ahead and jump in now. I would like to go ahead and welcome Will to the Lightning Junkies podcast. How are you doing this evening?
Hey, Chaz. Super stoked to be here. Really love what you're doing with the show, and just happy to be a guest.
I'm really glad to finally have you on here. You were definitely one of the first people ever wanted to have you on here. I kind of look up to you in a kind of dev sort of way, like you're doing all these different things, and you're very useful to the entire ecosystem.
Well, I appreciate it, and I'm totally flattered. I don't know if I can live up to that hype, but I'll do my best.
Well, absolutely. Here, let's go ahead and jump in. I know that you have a bit of a unique starting point than a lot of my previous guests have been. If I'm correct, previous to you making Joule, the Chrome extension, you actually came from Ethereum. Is that right?
Yeah, so I was working on, I started working on it when it was my Ether wallet, but then that kind of turned into my crypto. But it was basically the main use or the main way people would like buy ICOs and get in on those, because it was a wallet that had no opinions really. It was just like it would handle any ERC20 token. I had gotten into Ethereum sometime in like late 2016, early 2017, and was just looking around for open source projects to contribute to, and that was kind of the peak one that intersected with my skills. So after contributing for a bit, they brought me on to work on it.
Okay. And was your entrance into Ethereum the main entrance into crypto overall?
Yeah, for sure. So my brother, James O'Byrne, who you maybe have heard his name, he's a core developer, Chaincode Labs. He had been talking about Bitcoin for a long time. I think we still have some email that we occasionally forward to each other to laugh about, where he like links to some Bitcoin mailing list posts like from like 2012 or 2013. He's like, guys, I think this thing's pretty serious. He was definitely the original of my family to kind of bring it up. And I kind of played it off for a while, like didn't pay too much attention to it because I wasn't really deep into, a lot of the topics that I think that a lot of Bitcoiners care about. I was pretty politically inactive. I didn't really pay much attention to economics. I was just kind of in it for like the fun stuff. And so Ethereum grabbed me pretty early on because there was lots of shiny stuff, and like, it was kind of easy to understand as an application developer. And so, it kind of has this really attractive upfront quality that grabs people who, at surface level have only just kind of looked into this stuff.
Would you say, just to be clear, would you say that you're more of a Bitcoin person now, or are you still an Ethereum person?
Oh, 100% Bitcoin for sure. I think that I'm very understanding of people, I think, on both sides, because I see the qualities, that people are looking for in this. The main difference for me is, for one, like, Bitcoin delivers on pretty much everything that people are looking for it now. Of course, people like to point out the, like, peer-to-peer digital cash thing, that it doesn't really get used for that, but I don't think anyone's trying to sell it as that at this point. So Bitcoin pretty much delivers on all of its promises. Whereas my sort of moment where I started to phase over was, as a developer working on Ethereum, I was running my own node, since that's what you're supposed to do. And after a while, I just couldn't keep up with it. It was expanding beyond the abilities of the hardware I was running it on. I was having a lot of trouble, like, just keeping Geth from freezing up. I tried parity, but then there are bugs between those two implementations, like differences that, you run into corner cases there. I just kind of was, like, scared. I was scared. I was, entrusting a lot of my money into the system that I was slowly but surely losing faith in. And so when it came time for me to try out Bitcoin and spin up Bitcoin D, it just worked, and it, synced in a reasonable amount of time. And once I sort of understood time preference and, manually setting transaction fees, I realized, oh, like, I don't really care that much about block time when I'm moving my digital gold. It's not really a payments platform necessarily. And that was also where I started to look into Lightning, because I thought, well, we're going to need a payments platform. What's it going to be? And Lightning was still in its early days, but it was there.
Okay. Would you say that maybe the people that are, in Ethereum that are still kind of plugging away at it, people that you might have worked with previously, do you think that they're totally off base? Do you think that entire project is doomed to fail?
I don't think they are, for a lot of reasons. One is that unless you're working on a certain set of problems, like, Ethereum offers a lot of interesting problems to work on, and you can probably get paid to do that. I think there's a lot of funding in the Ethereum ecosystem. And so I think for some people, they're interested in the research. The politics or the monetary theory behind it is secondary. They just want to work on interesting problems. And Ethereum has plenty of interesting problems, which can be fun if you're a researcher. It could be really bad if you're, a user or a developer. I also think that there are certain sets of problems that Bitcoin isn't interested in solving, like the idea of smart contracts, at least in the short term. And Ethereum does kind of work for that today. I mean, if you want to build, like, a distributed, gambling system that doesn't rely on proven randomness, if you want, like, real-time proof that you've got a random system, it can do that. And I don't think anybody's trying to build that for Bitcoin. So, I think people have reasonable reasons that they choose to work on Ethereum, but I also think that they tend to not have thought a lot about it from a holistic standpoint. I think people who are interested in the tech are interested in the tech. People who are interested in building fun games are only interested in that. It's only kind of in Bitcoin where you see people who have these, like, totally multifaceted interests in the economics, in the politics, have the technical background to understand it, understand the game theory implications of how these systems work, understand networking. Like, you have to understand a lot of things for Bitcoin to make sense, which is a lot to ask for your average person.
That's interesting, kind of understanding why you would move over to Bitcoin here. So are you saying you're kind of more sold on the overall Bitcoin ethos versus the, maybe put it into square quotes, for the Ethereum ethos?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little hard. I feel that Ethereum doesn't have a consistent narrative, so it's a little hard to say what that ethos is. And I think there are certain aspects of Bitcoin that I still, like, am at odds with. I don't, sometimes always feel like I'm 100% aligned with the, like, air quotes community. I think really what it comes down to is the Unix philosophy of design, which is to do one thing and to do it really well. And Bitcoin tends to do its one thing really well. And that's just a lot easier to reason about as a developer and as someone who's, got some of their money tied up in it.
When you first started developing on Bitcoin, was it developing on Lightning or was it developing on base chain of Bitcoin?
So I had a few kind of brief interactions with Bitcoin from a development standpoint before I really dove into it, and it very strongly turned me off from it. Just in terms of like getting your head around the UTXO model when you're kind of used to the way databases work, where you kind of have these like easy ways to look up balances and keep track of things, where now you've got like all these distributed coins and you have to like combine them together. That was pretty daunting up front. And so I had some brief interactions with it and was initially turned away. It wasn't until Lightning kind of lured me in, where I was like, okay, you've got this one node, it's got an available balance it can draw from. Like, the reason channels exist is because they're not fungible, unlike Bitcoins, which should be fungible. And so that's why I was confused about the UTXO model, which of course I understand all of that a lot better now. But from the outset, Lightning looks a lot more like what a developer might expect from a payment system. So I kind of came in from the top down, started learning about Lightning. After a while of learning about it, you want to know the underlying layer, and that is where Bitcoin started to come together and make sense to me. So yeah, I would say I started with Lightning and then kind of worked my way down from there.
Okay. And what was your first project working on Lightning?
So it was Joule. I had the very good fortune, and definitely not nepotism, of being able to join the chain code. They're known for their summer residency, where they spend, I think it's like 12 weeks to get people to work on Bitcoin. They did a sort of a short, thematically appropriate Lightning residency, where they did 1 week, and they just had some awesome people in, Alex Bosworth, Christian Decker, just a bunch of the Lightning all-stars came in for a week, and we learned about it and we built something on it. And so Joule is my project there. I was kind of coming again from the Ethereum background. I was used to this extension MetaMask, which plugs an Ethereum wallet into your browser. And I thought, okay, this is something that would be really cool with Lightning, because, what's the point of micropayments if you have to like open up a terminal and paste in a payment request to make payments? Like, it should happen kind of seamlessly. And so I built that there, and people got a little bit more excited about it than I had expected. So, I kind of kept working with that. And then a month later, I released it, properly in the extension store, and people started using it.
I definitely have to say it's one of the more underrated Chrome extensions out there. I know it's not a wallet per se, but it's probably the one that I use like 99% of the time. There might be times where I pop out my phone and I use a mobile Lightning wallet, but most of the time I'm using my main node with Joule. So,
oh, awesome, man! I love hearing that. I take a little bit of credit, but also use this as a caveat of being one of the first, other than Zap, Lightning wallets. And Zap at the time was doing the same thing that Joule is still doing, which is it just communicates with an existing node over RPC. Now with Zap, you can create your own node. I don't know that I'll ever get there with Joule, just because, for one, it's a little bit of a power user tool right now. I think it requires a decent bit of just know-how of how to set up a node. And also, I'm kind of personally horrified at the idea of writing software that fully controls a node. But yeah, the caveat that comes with that was I didn't have all these awesome wallets to kind of use as inspiration. And I think since having made it, I feel totally outclassed when I'm using something like Breeze or Eclair. I just think their mobile wallets really nail a lot of the kind of look and feel that you want out of a Lightning wallet. And meanwhile, Joule is starting to look more and more like a enterprise software, or like a Microsoft Excel or something to me. But it was an early foray into it, and I'm happy to kind of have been superseded by these full teams that are now building businesses on top of Lightning.
I mean, I'm just wondering, who else is going to take up the mantle of Joule. I know you were kind of telling me before we started recording that you haven't been able to work on it as much lately.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, as I'm sure a lot of open source developers have encountered. Like, at a certain point, you can keep working on this stuff until the money runs out. I was sort of getting there, and I love working on Joule, and I continue to support it. But I've since kind of had to go back to putting it on the back burner as a side project. But I like the way you phrase "take up the mantle," because I really do think that Lightning on the web has sort of taken a back seat to mobile apps, and I'm really glad that people have made these really sleek and functional mobile apps. But I really I'm just kind of sad to see Lightning move away from the web, which is where I think it makes the most sense. Because with mobile apps, for one, you're always going to be in the walled garden of Apple and Google. You're going to be at the mercy of what APIs they add to mobile apps, and being in the mobile store. And they have such a strong incentive to not have Lightning or Bitcoin succeed, because they can't take their 30% cut of sales when you're paying with Bitcoin. Whereas the web is this completely open platform where, as long as you can communicate it over HTTP, you can do whatever you want. And so I really do hope that we see kind of a stronger, like, web-driven Lightning experience emerge, and hopefully the mobile apps can kind of foster that a little bit instead of fragmenting it, because I just kind of feel like we've got a bunch of good mobile payments as it is. I mean, honestly, if you want peer-to-peer anonymous local payments, like, nothing beats cash. So I just don't look at the mobile use case as being the most interesting one to me.
Okay. Do you have any favorite Lightning app yourself at the moment?
Oh man, well, I really like the episode you did with Crypto a couple of days ago. I feel like that guy's a huge inspiration for me, just like sort of pushing the use case of like little fun apps, and I really appreciate that he has this laissez-faire attitude about like not needing everything to be perfect just to get it out there. So big shout outs to Crypto. I'm really excited to see the gaming space move forward with things like Light Night and the ZBD guys working on their games. But as for my day-to-day uses, I would say, I mostly use Lightning as a tipping platform right now. So Bottle Pay and Tip and Me, that's kind of been really the only use case to stick beyond going to a website and just trying something out once and then not really coming back. So I think it's still a really underexplored area.
Let's kind of jump back into Joule a little bit here. So how long did you work on that, when you were actually working on it?
So I probably gave Joule an honest year of my life, with some other projects sprinkled in there, because I kind of always knew that Joule, I'm just one guy, and I didn't want to like try to turn it into a business or take VC funding or whatever and hire people to work on it. So I always knew that it has a sort of intrinsic shelf life beyond what the open source community wants to do with it. So I really invested a lot of my time and effort into trying to foster a development community around Lightning. And so I've pushed more on things like WebLN, which is this sort of open standard that Joule uses, but a few other wallets like Blue Wallet have implemented to allow web apps to like request and make payments. Tried to push forward some like use cases that I hope other people adopt, like allowances and auto payments, and also tried to get the Lightning app developer community going with some open source demos and some tutorials and stuff like that. So rather than build stuff myself, because I know I'm eventually going to run out of steam or get hit by a bus or whatever, I've really been more trying to focus on getting more people like me who maybe build Ethereum applications to say, oh, what's this Lightning thing? Let me check it out. Oh, cool. It has a strong developer community. Let me like give that a shot.
Okay. Was there anything that was kind of difficult while working on Joule, developing it?
Honestly, working with Lightning is like a dream. At least, at the time, I would say LND was clear in a way the strongest API amongst the Lightning nodes. I know there's been a lot of effort from other node implementations to kind of catch up on that front. So I would say the actual API level is really just awesome to work with, especially compared to like working with Bitcoin D. But one thing that really stands out to me, and I've seen a bunch of products struggle with this as well, is just like the way that software has been going is very anti-cypherpunk, like host your own hardware type stuff. For instance, you'll probably remember that like 5 years ago, you didn't see that many websites use HTTPS, and now every website uses HTTPS. And that's great. because you want to have these encrypted connections with websites so that people can't snoop on your traffic. The problem is that the way that HTTPS is kind of developed is we've actually centralized the web a lot by having these certificate authorities. You have these organizations that mint these SSL certificates. And the way most browsers and a lot of software works is that they check with these certificate authorities. So if I want to have a secure encrypted connection with my Lightning node, I have to use a self-signed certificate because one of the certificate authorities won't mint one for me. And a lot of software just assumes that that's malicious behavior, when in reality, it's just me trying to run my own stuff. So I'd say a lot of the difficulties that I've run into with Lightning development is just that all of the software that we work on is really centered around the idea of having one of the big guys kind of give you the okay, whether it's writing a mobile app and having to deal with store rules, or writing a web app and having to deal with DNS or certificate authorities. A lot of the stuff that we're building on top of just isn't really meant for the little guy who kind of wants to have his own hackerish setup, which is really unfortunate. And I've definitely seen like Casa, for instance, having their node that runs in your home, that has a self-signed certificate as well. And they've just chosen in their case to not host it over HTTPS. So you have an insecure, unencrypted connection to your Casa node, which I totally understand the choice they made, but it sucks that we have to forego encryption because of its sort of centralized nature in the browser.
Well, I guess, is there anything really that can be done to address that on a large scale at all?
On a large scale, it's hard to say. I mean, one thing is that, our browsers, at least Google Chrome and, Safari, which have a huge browser share, are, run by Google and Apple, who certainly don't mind centralizing factors being, it kind of helps their business model. So supporting alternative browsers, I think, helps push that a little bit. And then, but from that standpoint, you still have to get these things, kind of everyone to agree on them. So I think that Mozilla is probably the most open to this use case of like, I want to run my own hardware. And so, maybe filing issues on the Mozilla bug tracker. But ultimately, it's really hard as an individual to make an effort in this, aside from being vocal.
I just wanted to maybe kind of touch on a few of the other Lightning apps that you develop. I think you have maybe 2 other ones. Is that right?
It's hard to know what you consider an app. I definitely have a few toys out there.
Sure. Well, let's talk about the toys then.
So TipHub is the one that first comes to mind, which was right after the craze of Tip and Me really blowing up when Jack gave a shout out to that project. I kind of had this mindset of like, okay, tipping's cool, but it's custodial. And I don't have anything inherently against custodial applications. I mean, I use Venmo to settle up with my friends. I still use PayPal on occasion. And those are inherently centralized services. And I'm not like shaking in my boots that they're going to steal my money any day. And so, I think any project that's attached to a real person with a real name who lives in a first world country, like, I'm not worried about them just running off and stealing my money. But I thought that, at least from a censorship resistance and sort of a being self-sufficient standpoint, there should be an open source alternative. So I built this it's not self-hosted, it is still hosted on a website, but it's a way to hook up your Lightning node to receive tips even when you're not there to generate invoices. And you can embed a tip button into your GitHub projects. So GitHub projects have these README files that will render like images and links and stuff. So it adds a little button there so people can support your open source projects. And so that was a really fun one to build because one great thing about writing software that you would use is you get to use it. And so I've thrown those buttons on the bottom of my projects and I get tips, not like a ton, but I get beer money like every few days, maybe every few weeks. And it's just super gratifying to like connect with people on that level and to not have to Jimmy Wales style, like add a giant blocking header on your Wikipedia page. It says like, please give me money, but just have a little tip jar and for people to drop money in there and to know that that was a peer-to-peer interaction. I didn't have to trust a third-party service to hold on to the money.
Got it. And was there one more thing that you developed as well?
I'm trying to think.
I could have thrown there
what that would be. I don't at all want to take credit for this, like even in the least, but I do want to find any opportunity to shout out that one of the contributors to Joule, his name is Jamal James, um, had I had this idea of like a way to spin up simulated environments for developers to work on Lightning, and he took this idea and totally ran with it and made this this really cool developer tool called Polar, which I've been shouting from the rooftops. So I don't know if you mistook that as something I had involvement in. I helped like a very little bit, but it's all on him. But if you're a developer interested in Lightning, you should totally check out Polar. It's like the coolest tool, I think.
There is another thing that I actually wanted to mention here at this point. It's not an app or anything per se. You did make a series of Medium articles tutorial for developing a Lightning web app at that. Is that right?
Yeah. So I've been really, if I'm being honest, I've been frustrated with the Lightning community because I haven't seen on the node front, there's a ton of great open source development, but on the application front, whether it's because people are too embarrassed because they don't think their source code's good enough or because people are trying to, keep their secret sauce secret, I don't know what, but there hasn't been a ton of open source application development. So that was something I really wanted to change because most developers I know really learn by like looking at working projects, reading the code, understanding how they work, tweaking it, and then building their own thing. So that was what I wanted to do. So in addition to open sourcing my projects like TipHub and the other one you were probably thinking of was the Run LND shirt sale.
There you go.
Yeah, where you had to prove that you were running an LND node by signing a message, and then you could buy this T-shirt. So open sourcing projects like TipHub, like Run LND, and then making this article series, because the thing that makes Lightning better is getting more people in it. Like it's a network, and in order to have a bigger, stronger network, you need more people, both users and developers. And so, that's just been a huge priority for me.
Got it. Okay. Well, I mean, I've looked at the series multiple times because, I've been wanting to become, actually learn how to do more of these things. But I don't, I have some experience in Python, but not much experience in JavaScript. And I believe you have TypeScript on this particular project. Is that right?
Yeah. TypeScript, I think, it's really important to use a language that you can have a lot of faith in it doing the right thing when you're dealing with people's money. So I usually advise people to use TypeScript. I like Python. I want to recommend it, but given its runtime error nature where you don't know the code is going to have problems until it actually reaches that point in code, I usually advise people to stick with a typed language for their Lightning projects, because there are all sorts of unexpected failures that can happen, and you don't want people losing money as a result of that.
Okay. Let's say I'm an advanced newbie. I'm not sure that that'll help, but how difficult do you think it would be for someone that's dedicated for them to pick up these series of articles and pump out an app here?
I mean, I would like be overly complimentary myself and say it's super easy because I did a great job. But I mean, the reality of it is I broke it out into pieces because I knew it would be a big load for people to take on at once. But I think that, as long as you're not completely horrified by the terminal, it's actually really kind of friendly to get started, because for one, the TypeScript compiler, it's going to like gently let you know where your errors are, as opposed to a lot of development where you get an error and a line number and you hope it's going to point you in the right direction. And likewise, the Node developers have done a really great job at just writing, really robust software that works all the time, at least in my experience and most people I know's experience. So you're not going to run into the kind of issues where it's like, oh no, I forgot to set this like compiler flag, and I'm running into weird states. Like most, at least LND, which I use for the tutorial, is super easy to spin up. Even more so if you use that app Polar that I was just pimping out. And so I think once you get the project just running, just displaying the very basic, I think the first post just has it display your node's info like as plain text. Once you get there, it's just slow iterations, which I think anybody's easily capable of, just following instructions. And then once you actually get it running, it's pretty easy to see where you can tweak it. You can either tweak, just the styles if you want to make it your own, or you can tweak some of the functionality by changing like simple constant values. And I think like the more that you feel comfortable changing it, you start to understand more and more of the pieces. And before you know it, I feel like you can transform it into just a completely different application than the little toy I have you build.
So do you think someone doing these articles are going to pick anything up if they manage to make their way through it?
Yeah, I think you'll get a deeper understanding of the way Lightning transactions work. Even though they feel instant, they're actually asynchronous. And you need to wait for them to go through. You'll probably get a decent understanding of how a modern web application works, where you've got some code running in the browser on your user's computer, and then some code running in the cloud on a server on some computer that's publicly accessible. And then you'll also one thing that I think is a good fringe benefit here is you'll understand better how to secure your node, but to not have to like lock it away. One like pet peeve I've had for a while is the Bitcoin developers have said like never expose your Bitcoin node to the public internet because you don't know what bad things people are going to be doing. And while that's a good philosophy in general, it can be really frustrating in the use case where you want to have your node accessible, like and to be able to use it on the go, and so you don't have to trust a block explorer or something like that. Whereas the Lightning approach for all of the node implementations that I know of, they have a high level of confidence in the security of their nodes and what you should be able to expose and what you should lock down. And so I think it'll get you to be a better node operator by running through these. You'll understand how to communicate with your node, how to secure it, and how to program your money to interact with it in a safe way.
Okay, kind of briefly said that if you have are comfortable with command line, that you should be able to jump onto this thing. Would you say that there is any other things that people should be already aware of, already have experience in before they jump on this? Or
I used to say at least have a Lightning node. Again, not to keep shilling, but with Polar, you really don't need that. I would say just have a tenacious attitude. Coding is pretty hard. I know there's kind of a running joke on the internet of like just telling people in industries that are really suffering right now, like, oh, just learn how to code. Developers get paid so much money. But it's a difficult task to really wrap your head around some of that. So I would say come in with the attitude that like you're going to have to spend some time learning if coding isn't already second nature to you.
Okay. And would you encourage any listeners out there thinking about it to go ahead and to try to give this thing a shot or something?
I think that if you want to, if you're motivated to learn more about Lightning, even if you don't want to publish your own app, I think it's great. But maybe after either getting a little comfortable with the tutorial, or if you want to really dive in a way that you're really helping people out, I would say look for existing open source projects out there also and see where maybe you can contribute. I think this is great for getting your bearings, but I think really building a community and not having people all work on their own projects separately, but have people come together and work on stuff together really makes better developers, and it makes stronger projects, and it makes people not feel so alone, just like sitting in their room working on these projects by themselves, but you're actually a part of this huge movement.
So would you say it's accurate that you've been actively trying to get more developers into Lightning?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that's the one edge that I think Ethereum has had and still continues to have. And, a lot of people would dismiss that and say, oh, well, they're just, they're building crap or whatever. And I think that's too simplistic. I think that when you capture developers, there's sort of a time lag with the kind of value it has, is people aren't building amazing things right when they show interest, but slowly you get mind share amongst the people who keep this thing running. And as much as I love the usual cast of characters that we have here in the Bitcoin community and the Lightning community, you have to sustain growth for the long haul, especially if, as a lot of these, a lot of the people who are holding Bitcoin are talking about like 7 generations of wealth. Like we need to make sure that we keep people interested and keep building up the next round of developers. And that's why I love organizations like Chaincode, Square for having their Square crypto team, trying to get more people in the space, either existing developers from outside of Bitcoin, or to grow new developers who have shown like a little interest in Bitcoin to turn them into full-fledged developers.
So what's the actual pitch here? There's this Ethereum fan. How do you get them into Lightning?
That's pretty tough. I would say, as much as I love a good meme, it's really hard to meme people in, because memes by definition have to spread to the masses, and I really think you have to connect with somebody on what they're there for. What interested them in Ethereum. If they're interested in the tech, like, I think Lightning is such an obvious win when you start looking at the different node implementations and their APIs, and some of the cool programmable things like HODL invoices, and being able to what is it, Rusty Russell's, I think it's Rusty's, but I could be totally wrong, but the chat app built on top of the Lightning Network, just things like that. I think Lightning has a ton of technical marvels to it. If they're interested in the transactions per second, or the privacy, or kind of those more metrics driven type of things, getting them to understand that the Lightning Network is totally boundless, I think is huge. And getting them to understand that you don't need a blockchain for certain transactions. You can have a high degree of certainty even being off chain. And I think that some people are just turned off of Bitcoin because they had a bad impression of it from a long time ago for some reason or another. And so, just approaching people with kindness and interest, and trying to bring them into the flock rather than drive them out, I think is always a good approach. And maybe you don't gain a true Bitcoiner right that minute, but you at least don't make an enemy.
Okay, would you say that it's almost more likely that you would get someone to jump into Lightning if they weren't already exposed to, a different cryptocurrency in some other previous time?
I think Lightning actually plays well with people who have some understanding of cryptocurrencies, but maybe are a little disillusioned with their projects. I mean, one thing is that even Ethereum core developers will tell you that, like, layer 2 is the way out of a lot of the problems, and so many people, they've either heard of Lightning or they've heard of other layer 2 solutions. Like Zcash has the confusingly named Bolt. You've got things like Plasma and Raiden on Ethereum. They've heard of these, and they just assume, like, okay, it's coming, it's some ways off. And so if you can really truly show someone who's already familiar with those, hey, Bitcoin has this cool thing called Lightning and it works today. Like, it 100% works. It doesn't just kind of work. It's actually there. People are transacting real money on it. I think that can be really powerful for them to see that this stuff is feasible, that it's here, and all they need to do is download an app, set up a wallet, maybe run a node, and they can do it too.
Do you see, Lightning kind of transforming, the lay of the land with Bitcoin and maybe in crypto generally, and, in more ways than we have now?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think Lightning suffers the same problem that Bitcoin did, which is that it's sort of, its identity isn't fully formed yet as to what it's good for, what people actually intrinsically want to use it for. I know that you had Shinobi on, and he hates micropayments, and we've heard a lot of different use cases for Lightning, but none of them have strongly emerged yet as the killer app. I think that it's hard to see Bitcoin being anything other than the store of value for the short term. So I don't really see people buying coffee, the classic buying coffee example. Like, nobody wants to do that. I don't know about you, but I don't want to sell my Bitcoin for anything. So I don't see that kind of payment working out. I mean, I think what's really awesome, and why I like to encourage developers into the space, is if you can make a completely unique experience that you can only participate in by spending Lightning Bitcoin, you no longer have to really argue about, like, okay, well, is Lightning good for this or that? Because if people want what you have, they're willing to do it, even if they haven't totally convinced themselves that they want to. And so, I think, like, Satoshi's Place is kind of a good example of that. People were totally engulfed in the idea of having their pixel on that board, and they really wanted it. And so I think that really onboarded a bunch of people, because unless you did it with Lightning, there was no way around it. And I think that's why I really like the game use case, is if you have a Lightning driven game and the only way to play that game is through Lightning payments, people are going to want to do it. So you can sort of drive scarcity by creating assets that you're only willing to exchange for Lightning.
Do you think it's likely that any bigger games are ever going to adopt Lightning as their in-game method of, getting people onboarded and monetize, etc.?
I mean, I won't say no, because I think that there will always be fringe groups that need an uncensorable payment method, so that you could be that could be gambling, that could be like sex games. So I could see one of those communities adopting something that has the privacy and uncensorability benefits of Lightning. But I think ultimately, we're going to have to see a lot of the like user experience form before we see anything like that. I won't pretend to know exactly how some of these games are implemented, but right now there isn't really a strong universal way to hook up my wallet over here to make payments over there, other than by sending money to them and just having an internal ledger there. And at that point, you're not really leveraging the benefits of Lightning. You're just using rows in a database. Like, it might as well be Fortnite V-Bucks or whatever. So I think that, that's one reason why I really like the web, and I really was trying to push the standard of doing the payments in the browser, is because the unique benefit of Lightning payments is that you're in control of the money, and games typically have not had that direct level of interaction. So I think unless we can shape a user experience where people are used to programming their own personal node, or their own wallet, and like giving limited access for applications to make payments and stuff like that, we're going to continue to see this sort of custodial focus with it, which I think, from a larger game developer's standpoint, like, there's no benefit to using Lightning at that point. If they're already fully in control, they might as well control the whole space.
I mean, I have a hard time seeing a game company like adopting Bitcoin and adopting Lightning. I don't really see the overall advantage to them in that. Maybe I'm being short-sighted.
No, I think that's a very reasonable approach. I mean, any company is going to do what's most profitable, and I think unless we see some like absolutely insane shifts in the way the world thinks of currency, like, Bitcoin's always going to be kind of this unnecessary add-on for most payment systems, games included.
Okay. Do you see there being any interesting use cases in the future that maybe right now aren't practical or anything like that?
So I think, again, I want to say it was Rusty, but I'm going to be so embarrassed if I'm misattributing. But the example of the encrypted, uncensorable chat app over Lightning, I think really opened kind of this door of the fact that we're all running these always on machines that are all talking to each other, and there's payments built into that. What can we leverage with that, given that I've already set up this node? I don't really mind if I am getting more inbound and outbound traffic from it if it's making me money. So I could see there being things like VPNs where you maybe directly open a channel and your nodes talk back and forth. Chat apps, as noted before, maybe like file sharing networks where you have a hub node that's kind of like your torrent tracker, and you're communicating over that. I guess the sort of the crux of it is, I don't think anyone wants to be bouncing over hops in the network to do this. So I would be interested to see direct channels where I open a channel to your node, that sort of being more leveraged and abused as just a general, like, hey, I have a TCP connection to you. Let's send some stuff back and forth, and I'm able to pay you very easily for doing that.
Is the Lightning Network what actually scales Bitcoin? Sorry to put you on the spot there.
No, that's a good question. I really think if scaling was our only problem, that you would see people like just using the Coinbase app and sending money back and forth to each other using that because, you can do it with no transaction fees because it's just a database update for them. I mean, obviously you risk the censorship and all that, but for 99% of people, their use case, that doesn't even pop into their mind when it just comes to sending money. So I think if that were the biggest problem, we would have a really popular custodial app, but we don't, at least to my knowledge. Maybe in certain communities and pockets, people are using some kind of custodial app, but no, I don't think that Lightning solves scaling, but more so because I don't know that scaling yet is like the most imminent failure case for Bitcoin. I think it's good when blocks are full. That shows that the market is valuing Bitcoin appropriately. That we have as many miners, doing as much work as the network needs, and we have as many people using it as the network can handle.
Okay, so how about an alternative to scaling? What about, does Lightning improve privacy?
Oh, absolutely. I feel like, I mean, people do talk about it, so I don't want to say it's totally unmentioned, but I feel like when people talk about the benefits of Lightning, they talk about speed, they talk about, the block size problem, scaling, and I just feel like it's really understated how valuable the Lightning Network is for privacy, especially given I think a lot of people don't understand that you can have these private nodes that have private channels where it's not broadcast to the wider network, and that channel opens and channel closes on chain are indistinguishable. You can use some heuristics to try to guess which things are channel opens and channel closes, but it's not surefire. So if you really wanted to be completely private on the Bitcoin network, all it would take is to open direct private channels to the things that you want to use, or to just open direct private channels to routing nodes and do hops to where you want to send money. And you could even set up two nodes, send to yourself, and basically have a private coin join.
Okay, would you say that privacy on Bitcoin is one of your personal interests?
It's a good question. I see the value in it. I don't know if I find it to be like the sexiest problem, because I think I have this unfortunate benefit of living in, being an upstanding citizen who lives in a country that's generally somewhat free. And so I'm not faced day to day with privacy problems, with censorship problems. I don't find myself in a fringe group where I'm concerned about that kind of stuff. So I think that as a developer, it's really important to work on something that you're personally passionate about, that you gain a lot of benefit from, because you're gonna build the best damn thing if you're gonna use it. And I think in a lot of cases, I've been bad to my own privacy. I'm sure that you could dox me 8 ways to Sunday if you were an invested party. So it's something I have a lot of respect for, but not something that I personally put first and foremost on my mind when I'm building something.
Okay, so what would you say is your current interest? Let's say you were able to jump back into Bitcoin and Lightning land. What would be your specific little thing that you'd go back to?
I mean, the person that I love building most for is somebody who kind of falls through the gaps and otherwise has a hard time working with the kinds of systems we have. Like, I remember the story. Do you remember that phone app, Flappy Bird?
Yes, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, I got to give a lot of credit. It was made by some guy in Southeast Asia who, it was like, just a really small, simple side project for him, threw it up on the App Store, and it became an overnight sensation. And so for starters, like 30% of everything that guy made went to Apple, which, when you're living in a much poorer country, like 30% could go a very long way. And then because, he was such a public individual as a result of that, he started receiving a lot of threats and just, had a really bad time of it. And so like, I think of that guy when I'm building stuff, is like, I really want to empower these people who like Bitcoin totally works for them. Bitcoin like would be a great use case for them. Whether you're like a sex worker who gets deplatformed by every, financial institute, even though what you're doing is totally legal, or, if you're trying to raise money for something, but you rub people the wrong way. Like, I just want to make sure that while maybe you don't have the best user experience, like there's always a pretty good option for you. So I've really liked the kind of surge of interest in these sort of Patreon type clones for Lightning. I don't think any of them have quite nailed it yet. So I think that's an area still for improvement. I think content platforms, whether it's like a streaming site or something, still seems to me to be a really interesting use case for Lightning. But I think all of these, like, we're still really early days, and so I don't feel this like mad rush to start working on these things, because I know that Lightning still has some ways to go from a protocol standpoint. It still has a ton of way to go from an adoption standpoint. I really hope that it's all still there waiting for me once I feel it's matured to a point where I can take it back on as a full-time endeavor.
So do you think that Bitcoin and Lightning Network, are they helping real people? Are they in the shape where they could help real people with their privacy, and maybe more of countries that aren't as friendly as the United States?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I have a ton of respect for Lee Kuhn, who writes for CoinDesk. I know she doesn't always get along with the community very well, but that's because I think that she kind of holds us to our word in a lot of ways. And she's done a lot of reporting on like the efficacy of Bitcoin in these sorts of either war torn or totalitarian government run places, and whether or not it works. And so I think we really had to eat some humble pie when we look at like the recent Iran government internet shutdown, where Bitcoin could be the coolest thing on the planet, but if the backbone of the internet that we all rely on suddenly gets pulled out from under us, like it does nothing for us. I think the places where Bitcoin is helping right now, they're few and far between, where it could not have potentially been solved by something else. But I'm okay with that, in that we're getting better, and we're plugging the holes, and this is a multi-decade journey that we're on to build the best damn payment system that we can. And I really appreciate the people working on things like Gotena and these other like distributed internet systems and peer-to-peer networks, mesh networks, stuff like that. People who are really setting us up to be able to test the limits of how hard can it be to shut this thing down. But I would say, to directly answer your question, I really think Bitcoin is not doing as much as we want it to.
Is there any way for us to change that?
I think one thing that really helps is to try to be a little less complacent in your life. And I'm like the main offender on this, but just every time you go to type in Google or you go to use one of these services that totally opens you up to the possibility of being censored or being taken down, like go look for an alternative, or try to shake up something in your life that you take for granted. Whether it's some aspect of your connection to the internet or some way that you communicate with somebody, install Signal, or like enable encryption on your hard drive when you turn it off. Just do a little bit more to be thoughtful about the way you interact with technology, because I think a lot of what these projects suffer from is lack of interest and lack of users, because people don't have to think about these things. And so I think if they see more people using it, and there's more of a financial interest in developing out these solutions because there's a market for it, we'll totally see people build more towards this future that I think everybody who's really deeply involved in Bitcoin wants to see.
If you could wave a magic wand and, either create an app or otherwise change how Lightning currently works, what would that be? Or what would you do?
That's a good question. I would probably want to really extend the sort of APIs that we take, like that we can expect everyone to have access to on Lightning. So right now, the only thing that you can be sure of for somebody running any form of node is that they're Bolt spec compliant. So it's these 10 rules that talk about like how nodes communicate to each other, how payment invoices are structured, that kind of stuff, like very core low level stuff. But as we solidify in those and we build up more, I would love to see more certainty around things like, how do I program my node to automatically make payments or automatically generate invoices to accept, and just kind of expand on the things that we can build with Lightning by having everybody's node work with it. Because I just think that a lot of the cool futuristic use cases that we talk about with Lightning right now are really hard to push forward when everybody's running slightly different software and it doesn't quite work the same way. I think we're just sort of stuck right now in the traditional payments that we have, and we're not really going to leverage a lot of Lightning if we stick with the same style of like the same things you could do with credit card payments, the same things that you could do with PayPal. So pushing forward the ways in which we can use Lightning without taking it into context of like, oh, I have Apple Pay on my phone, so Lightning should work the same way as that. Like, in my opinion, we should be like throwing out the playbook of how payments are done and starting to think from scratch, like, what would you want in this super futuristic ideal payment system?
Do you want to maybe flesh that out a little bit? Like, do you have any UX ideas you want to cook up for us here?
Yeah. So again, this is kind of why I struggle with the mobile app thing, is because I feel like, with mobile, you're really locked down to what phones offer. So it's hard for me to expound on that. But like, for instance, I think it would be awesome if everybody's computer ran a little server that anybody could publicly ping it to say, like, request a payment. And so I would have some program running on my computer that would know how to speak this language. It would have a little database built into it that I could enter, like, oh, if it's like my kid, accept any payment up to $10 a week, for their allowance. And if it's this subscription service, only accept up to like $7.99 a month, because that's what our agreed upon price was. And to really preserve this idea that people can ask without it being too problematic, because I think that a lot of the dark patterns we see on the web with like these free articles that you scroll down, then they hit you with a payment, or these like free to play games that kind of like milk you in uncomfortable ways to pay, come from like applications having a hard time getting you to pay. So by opening you up to making these smaller daily payments, but to also like get people interested in the idea of programming their payments so that they're not totally bombarded all the time with the psychology of having to spend money. That, if I can set up a $10 a month fund budget where I'm just like willing to spend it on things that I actually care about, that I don't, clutch at my pearls every time somebody asks me to pay, 10 cents for an article or something like that. Because I think when people talk about micropayments, they mostly fail from a psychological standpoint. And so by, basically getting past that by saying, look, like, a few pennies here, a few pennies there, like, isn't a big deal to me, we can open ourselves to getting more rich content that we're actually paying for.
I think I definitely seen that in myself at some point, definitely the move over of that psychology. I think a couple years ago, I was using yours.org, unfortunately.
It's all good. I have a love in my heart for anybody who tries to do something totally wacky. I know a lot of people hate on like Urbit, and I can't help but like these weird ideas that are bound to fail.
But I mean, I really liked the idea of, I'm throwing down cash for, good quality content. I'm not sure if it ever got to that point on there, but the concept was great. And I'm a content producer, right? I'm, doing that right now, apparently. One thing that I really wish that I had in Bitcoin land was the ability to have subscriptions done automated, because I don't want to have some hacky thing going on. I don't want them to have to deal with some hacky thing, because I feel like there is no good way to make that happen. I mean, even in fiat land, like I have to go sign up for Patreon and do all that. I don't want to sign up for Patreon. Do you think it's likely that we'll see the subscription thing being more likely in the short term? I definitely know, I remember Rusty mentioning at the Lightning conference about a bunch of different things coming, but I think if I remember, it was going to come at the famous 18-month time frame or something, like pretty far away. But do you see, anything along those lines coming the shorter term?
Yeah, I mean, I love Rusty's proposal, but I do think that 18 months is honestly optimistic, given it's just a really big spec to swallow. He had a lot of ideas for how invoices could be smarter, and I love all of them, but it's really hard to get, all the node implementations to agree on it and spec it out. I mean, probably what we'll see in the short term. I mean, I think I've been a huge fan of LND's macaroon system from the start. The idea is that you have these like little, it's kind of like OAuth, like when you sign up for a website using like Facebook or Twitter, and they say like this website can read this data and maybe post as you sometimes. It's the same idea of giving this permission to access to people to access your node. And right now it's pretty naive. It only lets you do very like specific hard coded things like use this endpoint for sending payments and stuff like that. But the idea of giving people permission access, and I really hope we see that in all forms of life. I mean, I think the thing that's really shitty about credit cards, about giving out your mailing address, your email address, your phone number, is like your public key is your private key in those situations, or like social security, where you don't have a way of revoking some piece of information once you've given it away. And I think right now, Bitcoin and Lightning are still suffering from that a little bit, where like if you wanted someone to spend money on your behalf, you would have to give them your private key. And by doing that, you give it all away. So I don't think that it would take a spec change to come up with a paradigm where I give someone permission to access to my Lightning node. And that permission to access comes with certain constraints, and they can only exceed, or they can't exceed those constraints. They have to work within them. And I would like to see that in all aspects of the world. Like if I give out a website my email address, I would like to have a little token that uniquely identifies them, and I can turn off that token at any point, and their emails won't come to me. I feel like one of the best things that Bitcoin has done is introduce asynchronous encryption to the world, and get people used to the idea that you can have this piece of information, you can keep it private, you can prove that you have it. You don't have to have the exact piece of information that allows you to make proofs. And so I think we could extend that to Lightning, to where we're giving out these little tokens, these permissioned access to our node, because your node is, conceivably always online. If you're a mobile wallet, you might run into some downtime, but there's no reason that people shouldn't be able to ping your node with some credential that says, hey, we agreed that you'd pay this much. Like, can you do it?
I think maybe one more question to kind of close us out. What do you see as being the biggest roadblock for, maybe the Lightning Network?
Yeah, just the Lightning Network on its own. I mean, I think we've got some scary shit lying in wait. I don't think the network has really seen a sustained orchestrated attack on it in the same way that we've sometimes seen with Bitcoin, whether it be someone trying to control mining power, or people attacking the peer-to-peer network. Lightning has, for whatever weird reason, been able to kind of just do its own thing on the side. And we had that CVE a few months ago where all the node implementations had to patch, and that went largely unexploited. And we just really haven't seen a malicious actor come into the space and say, how can I either steal everybody's money or destroy all their money? And so it'll be interesting to see what one of those looks like, because if you have a sufficiently large system, somebody's going to come to try to like stomp on your sandcastle. So I think probably for me, that's the one thing that keeps me up at night when I think about the Lightning Network, is like, oh yeah, we haven't really seen what that looks like. Do people come back online? If you were to knock every node that's online right now, how many of them would come back online? How many are just people who set it up once and stop thinking about it? Or how many are people who would be driven away by one single failure in the system? We just don't know what that looks like.
It's a very interesting concept. So the idea that maybe Lightning is too small for anyone to give a shit right now.
Yeah, it's kind of a blessing in disguise. I think Lightning's in this weird space in crypto where you see all these projects that have like way more funding and interest than they actually have development, where I see Lightning as having way more development than we've seen funding and interest. It's crazy to me how far it's come in the last 2 years, and to still only be at, roughly like 4,000 nodes online at any given time when, so many projects have way more funding, but far fewer active transactions per day.
How about we just jump to the end and you let all the listeners know how they can find you on the internets?
Yeah, that sounds good to me. I occasionally post on Twitter, but I'm more of a receiver than a giver. So you can find me at, oh God, I have to spell it out, at WBOBEIRNE. I don't know. I hope you have show notes or something. Nobody's going to remember that.
I will. I'm sure.
And then, honestly, the way that you can flatter me the most is show some interest in some of the open source projects I've got going on, whether that be Joule, WebLN, TipHub, or any of the tutorials. All of my tutorials have GitHub repositories linked to them because, of course, all my tutorials are about code. So, if you want to learn more about Lightning, or if you want to become a developer, or, you just want to know how Lightning works better, pop in there. If you have any questions, like usually people get annoyed when you treat their GitHub issue queue like a Q&A section, but I love that, man. People come in there, ask questions. I love it. It's so good. So drop on by.
Well, perfect. Yeah, I'm always afraid of pinging people too much when I'm doing things on GitHub. But anyway, I really appreciate you joining me on the podcast. Well,
Chaz, it's been a pleasure, man. I hope to tune in to many more. Maybe make a second appearance years from now once you've exhausted your expansive guest list.
Well, hey, man. I hope we'll see you then, man. Take care.
All right. Later.
Boom. That was another electrifying episode of the podcast. What did you think? Did you take anything away from that episode? I definitely did, and I hope you did as well. At the beginning of the episode, I mentioned it costs $100 a month for me to run the podcast. Just to fix that for you, it costs 1.4 million sats a month to fund the podcast. So if you want to chip in Bitcoin or Bitcoin over Lightning, you can definitely do that at crowdfund.lightningjunkies.net. For now, let's look forward to the future, and I'll see you on the Lightning Network.